Hello, welcome to the GTC expert interview from London, UK. Today we are talking about public relations and communication strategies. Marketing professionals need to update their knowledge and skills in a constantly evolving world. We have in our studio, in our office today, Mr. Ardi Kolah, who is an expert, a business and marketing professional. Ardi is the author of 3 best-selling books: The Art of Influencing and Selling, Essential Law for Marketeers, High-Impact Marketing That Gets Results. He has worked with some of the world's most successful organizations, including the Cabinet Office in the UK, BBC, Disney, Shell, Procter & Gamble, Department of Business and Skills, Government of Abu Dhabi, Royal Navy, Westminster School, Imperial College of London, Cranfield University, and Cambridge University. So he's clearly a communication expert and he knows what he's talking about. Thank you, Ardi, for being here today.
Well, thank you so much for a very warm and rather over-impressive introduction.
So tell us, in terms of marketing and public relations, what has changed today?
Well, there's been so much that's changed. If we looked at what the industry looked like 5 years ago, we can't actually recognise what it looks like today. One of the biggest impacts for anyone working within marketing, public relations, any form of communication, and that also includes internal communication, is the internet. We can't ignore the fact that actually we are now living in a 24/7 connected world. In fact, the world has become a village. And that has some very interesting opportunities, but some very key challenges for all of us that work within marketing, public relations and communications. And one of the biggest challenges is the use of social media.
So you have delivered a course at the GTC this week in PR, public affairs and corporate strategy. How is it like to deliver a course at GTC?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that GTC really does understand its customer segment, and that's one of the things we've been covering in the last 2 days here. It's really important not just to understand who your customers are, but what their values, their attitudes, their perceptions, their beliefs, and clearly their motivations for wanting to learn more, and really understanding how one delivers really great content for them is, I think, at the heart of the success of GTC. And I think it's been a terrific opportunity for me to meet people from all over the developing world who have got some fantastic perspectives to share with not just me, but with the rest of the group. And I think the whole learning experience is much richer as a result.
So also during the training, you have mentioned the evidence-based marketing, which I liked and I found it insightful. Can you come back again on this notion of evidence-based marketing?
Sure. One of the problems that many people within public relations and marketing have had to struggle with is the fact that they're in what I call transmit mode. In other words, they're producing materials, events, news releases, brochures, product launches, and all the rest of it. And interestingly, that's not that difficult these days. We have so many tools and techniques to do that. The harder thing to do, really, is to try to get people to tell us what their interests are. In other words, for us to be more in receive mode. And being in receive mode allows people in public relations and marketing to get the evidence they need in order to be much more effective in the transmit mode. And so what we have to do is almost rewire our thinking in terms of what are we trying to achieve through marketing and public relations. And a lot of that is actually to connect with those audiences and markets and customers that we want to do business with. But in order to do that successfully, we have to hear what they have to say. So evidence-based marketing is very much about tuning in to the world in which our customers and clients and supporters live, rather than taking the position of everything about ourselves as being centered to our thinking.
Yeah. It's interesting you always also mention customers, and you also give us the example of some public organization officer who didn't think that their stakeholder were customer. Can you explain the power behind that notion of customer and customer service, even in public organizations?
Yes, it's actually a very interesting point that you've raised. I'm working with the Cabinet Office at the moment, and I've worked with many departments of state, as we heard in the introduction. What's very interesting is that since David Cameron became Prime Minister in 2010, he was very keen to start to introduce some thinking from the private sector into the public sector. And one of the bits of thinking that he was particularly keen on emphasising was the idea of customer. It's not necessarily the word itself, customer. You could be a member of the armed forces, and clearly you could be living in a barrack or a house provided by the armed forces. In some senses, you could say that that person was a user, but actually they're a customer. They have choices. They can choose not to work for the armed forces if they don't like where they live, for example. There is always a choice. And so the concept of customer is about how we approach that individual with a clear view of how we satisfy their needs and requirements, their aspirations, in order to engage with them and in order to achieve the objectives we want through working with them, whether that be an internal audience, whether that be an external audience. So customer has become very central to government thinking.
So, well, in your one of the books that you wrote, High Impact Marketing That Will Get Results, one of the notions that you explain also is that it's not what you offer, it's about what you deliver. Can you explain a little bit more this concept? I think that is a powerful concept that everybody needs to understand actually to get more results.
I think many people watching this interview would have a website, they may have done some brochure material, they may have been at events, for example. And the tendency for us as marketing and communication professionals is to tell a huge amount of information very, very quickly, perhaps overload someone with lots of things that we're doing, really. And all of a sudden, you start to see that actually you could go to our stand, if we were at an exhibition, and hear all of that great stuff that we offer, and go to another stand's exhibition, at the exhibition, and also hear almost exactly the same story, almost exactly the same list of things that they offer. If you're then in the position of someone who's walking around that exhibition, how do you distinguish between one provider and another? It's pretty difficult, isn't it? So the way to do it really powerfully, again going back to our principles of marketing and public relations, is to focus on what we deliver, not what we offer. Because what we deliver and how we deliver it, taking for example today at GTC, how we want to engage with the people who come on our training programs, why we're keen to ensure that once they've been on the training program, they've had a great experience, but really the real learning goes when they go back to their place of work and we see an improvement in performance 3 months, 6 months, a year later, and we capture that information. That's our difference, that's what we've delivered, and that I think is the better way of going about marketing something like a business like GTC, for example.
Also, once upon a time, it was very, very difficult to measure public relation impact. In your book, again, and in the class, actually, you mentioned the Barcelona principle. Can you give us a little bit of examples how or what kind of principles that it seems that is the gold standard in Europe now? So how these are applied in our organizations?
Well, the first thing to say is that the Barcelona principles are actually a global body of principles, not just for Europe. They happen to have been conceived at a conference in Barcelona a few years ago. But that was a worldwide conference of all the leading institutions within public relations. Just for a bit of background, I was part of that process. I was a director of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations in the UK, and I'm also a member of Council of the Public Relations Consultants Association, which is the biggest professional body in Europe now, representing the interests of professional people in public relations. So the Barcelona principles are global, and there are 7 principles, and as we say, I have covered them in the book, but for the purposes of this chat, I just want to focus on a few of those principles. The first principle really to focus on is that we're no longer interested in just simply outputs. In other words, we're not just simply interested in sending out news releases. What we're really interested in doing is understanding, as a result of sending out the news release, did that create the coverage? That's still an output, but as a result of that coverage, what happened for the client or the organisation? Was there a phone call? Was there an email? Did they get invited to pitch for new work, etc., etc.? That's about behaviour. And so the Barcelona principles are very much about focusing on measuring behaviour and outcomes rather than being focused on outputs. Another point that the Barcelona principles have put to bed, so to speak, is that in the past we looked at public relations as being free advertising. We've completely disbanded that idea and really put that to one side, because clearly you could have negative media coverage and that could be free advertising, but it wouldn't be worth a lot of money because it would be negative. So it's less about the amount of media coverage one is able to generate as a result of the activities an organisation or client wants to talk about, much more about the quality of that coverage and ideally how that impacts the reputation of the organisation, but helps to achieve its strategic and tactical objectives. And that's really, in essence, what the Barcelona Principles has really focused on, the value of public relations. And the last point to make is that really, for the last 15, 20 years, the term public relations has really been a proxy for media relations. In other words, we've looked at public relations in a very limited way, where we've gone through the lens of the media in order to get our messages across. That doesn't have to happen anymore, because social media has completely revolutionised, completely changed the way in which we communicate. And now I can sit here and talk to you and the audience watching this directly without having to go through a journalist, without having to talk to the BBC or the Financial Times in order to share that information, to share those thoughts. And so we've regained the word public in the term public relations.
That's great. That's really wonderful. And finally, to finish this interview, can you give people who are watching us today at least some key takeaway that they can implement straight away to get results in their communications?
I think the best starting point, perhaps, is to really understand your audience. It's something which we've been talking about over the last 2 days. It's something that I passionately care about. If we were working for a broadcaster or a national newspaper in your country, we wouldn't just simply put a program together or write an article without really understanding who we're doing that for. And so it's not good enough just simply to segment that audience in terms of where they live and how much they earn. But we really need to understand what their attitudes, their values, perceptions, beliefs and behaviours are, because there's a huge amount of commonality between someone who's 6, 16 and 60, for example. They may like the same things, they may care about the environment, etc., etc. So actually, old ways of looking at our audience from demographic and psychographic data, basic data, we have to get better at doing that. So we need a deeper granularity of interest in our audience and a deeper granularity of data. And that really does turbocharge the success of our communications. We don't get a strong lens on that audience, we won't be as successful as we can be. So I think, to answer your question, really understanding your audience is the key to great marketing and PR.
Okay, thank you very much, Ardi, for your insight and for your time. That's what we have the time for today. So I hope that some of the knowledge that you shared will help some of our audience to achieve more results in their communications in the next few days, the next few weeks. So if you want to know more about how GTC can help you in your marketing and strategy communication, please log on to our website, thegtcgroup.com, or you can send your email to inquiries@thegtcgroup.com. You can also follow us on Twitter. This is @thegtcgroup.